On September 22, 1979, an American satellite saw what looked exactly like somebody setting off a nuclear weapon. Nobody has ever admitted to it. Not a government, not a military, not a defector, not a leak, not a deathbed confession. 46 years later, the official position of the United States is still that it is not sure what happened. But the satellite was built for exactly one job, and the Vela satellites had done that job 41 times before without anybody arguing about what they had seen. Here is where it starts. In 1963, the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom signed the Partial Test Ban Treaty. No more nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in space, or underwater. If you were going to test, underground was the only option left, and a treaty like that is worthless without a way to check, so the United States built one. Enter Project Vela, 12 satellites placed in orbit to watch the planet for nuclear detonations. Each carried a pair of instruments called bang meters. They did one thing: they measured light. Because a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere produces a very particular optical signature, the fireball flashes, the expanding shock wave briefly blocks some of that light. As it dissipates, the light breaks through again. Bright, dark, bright. A double flash in a specific shape on a specific curve over a specific fraction of a second. That is what the bangmeters were watching for. Before September 1979, the Vela satellites had recorded 41 double flashes. Every one of those detections had been associated with a nuclear explosion. Then came number 42. Just before 1 in the morning, Greenwich time, on September 22, 1979, satellite Vela 6911 recorded another double flash. The location was the southern Indian Ocean, near the Prince Edward Islands, roughly halfway between southern Africa and Antarctica. Empty water, about as far from witnesses as it is possible to get on this planet. The estimated yield was small, roughly 2 to 3 kilotons, a fraction of Hiroshima. The response inside the United States government was immediate, and it was not ambiguous. The Central Intelligence Agency assessed the probability that this was a nuclear test at 90% or better. A December 1979 interagency intelligence study proceeded from the assumption that a nuclear explosion had occurred, while acknowledging that it could not determine with certainty exactly what had happened or who was responsible. And that night, the President of the United States wrote in his private diary that there was an indication of a nuclear explosion in the region of South Africa, either South Africa or Israel using a ship at sea, or nothing. 5 months later, in February 1980, Carter wrote again. This time, he described a growing belief among American scientists that the Israelis had indeed conducted a nuclear test explosion. That is a sitting president, in a private diary, describing what his own scientists were telling him. Now the corroboration. And this is the part that makes the story difficult to dismiss. The Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico recorded an unusual disturbance in the ionosphere on the morning of September 22nd, traveling from southeast to northwest. Nothing like it had been observed there before. The Naval Research Laboratory also had a global network of underwater listening stations. It detected an acoustic signal. Analysts later described that signal as consistent with a shallow underwater or near-surface explosion. And then there are the sheep. For decades, a professor at the University of Tennessee named Lester Van Middlesworth had been collecting thyroid glands from sheep and cattle around the world. Thyroids concentrate iodine, and one product of nuclear fission is iodine-131. It decays quickly, so if you find it, something recent made it. His Australian samples had shown nothing since French nuclear testing in the South Pacific ended in 1974. Then sheep slaughtered in Melbourne in October, and November of 1979 came back with abnormally high iodine-131, but the sheep in New Zealand showed nothing. Later, reconstruction of wind patterns found that debris originating near the Prince Edward Islands could have traveled east on the Roaring Forties and reached southeastern Australia several days later. Rainfall there could then have washed radioactive material down onto the pasture. So now we have a flash with the right signature, recorded by a satellite built specifically to detect nuclear detonations, an ionospheric disturbance, an acoustic signal, and a fission product appearing in sheep downwind afterward, which brings us to the panel. In 1980, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy convened an ad hoc panel of outside scientists to evaluate the evidence. It was chaired by Jack Ruina of MIT, a former director of the Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency. Richard Garwin, one of the most respected physicists in the country, also sat on it. Their report came back in July 1980. Its conclusion was that the signal was probably not a nuclear explosion. Their leading alternative was that a small meteoroid had struck Vela itself. That impact, they argued, may have knocked debris from the satellite. Sunlight reflecting from that debris could then have produced a signal that only looked like the characteristic double flash of a nuclear detonation. The panel did not give significant weight to the sheep evidence. That became the official finding, and it has never been formally overturned. But important people inside the intelligence community did not believe it. The director of Central Intelligence at the time, Admiral Stansfield Turner, later said he never took the panel's conclusion seriously. He said he had always agreed with his own analysts that the flash was a nuclear test. A senior arms control official from that era later said he was never able to shake the thought that the event may have been some kind of joint operation between Israel and South Africa. Decades later, researchers returned to the declassified evidence. In 2017 and 2018, researchers published peer-reviewed analyses in Science and Global Security examining the raw data and the possible explanations. They argued that the meteoroid explanation did not hold up well, and that the available radiological evidence remained consistent with a nuclear detonation on September 22nd. Here is the accounting. An American satellite built specifically to detect nuclear explosions recorded a double flash on September 22, 1979, confirmed. 41 previous double flashes recorded by Vela satellites had been associated with nuclear tests, confirmed. The CIA assessed the probability of a nuclear detonation at 90% or better, confirmed. President Carter recorded in his private diary that his scientists increasingly believed Israel had conducted a test, confirmed. Iodine 131 appeared in Australian sheep after years without comparable detections, confirmed. A White House science panel concluded that the Vela signal was probably not a nuclear explosion. That finding has never been formally overturned, confirmed. And who set off a bomb in the southern Indian Ocean in September of 1979? Not confirmed, not by any government, not by any public document, not in 46 years. And this story still isn't complete. Parts of the record are still classified. A supplemental report from that same panel dealing with the acoustic evidence has never been publicly released. Portions of the Naval Research Laboratory's underwater data also remain unavailable, which means that somewhere in a federal archive there is still information about one of the loudest unanswered questions of the nuclear age that the public has never been allowed to read. The United States built 12 satellites for one purpose: to catch somebody breaking the treaty. One of them detected exactly what it had been built to find. And then the country that built it decided it probably had not seen anything. The question is whether they were correcting a mistake or protecting what was seen. Up next on the Realize Files. For 75 years, American children were loaded onto trains, shipped west, and lined up on station platforms for strangers to pick from. Exposing real lies with real eyes.